What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by a special guest, Alex Freedman, broadcaster and communications director for the Oklahoma City Dodgers. Alex, I appreciate you joining us. You are also on the verge of opening day, so I know it's a busy season for you, but I appreciate the time today.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, as we talk here now, I think it's about technically 49 and a half hours away from the first pitch of our season.
I love it. I love it. Well, the reason I wanted to have you on is because you are more familiar than most of us with a handful of the guys that the Dodgers are going to be counting on this season, given your role in Oklahoma City. And I want to get to James Outman and Ryan Pepio, Miguel Vargas, those types of guys. But first, I just have to ask, because I'm a curious person. When I meet somebody who's a broadcaster, I feel like the story behind how they ended up where they ended up is always a story worth telling. So I believe you're going into your 11th season with the organization you're with now, although it has changed names a couple of times. So just a bit of background on you, I think would be helpful, and I'm sure entertaining for us.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in St. Louis and never really entertained kind of the thought of this kind of career. It was one of those things where I'd watch games and think, well, that's cool, but I never had any inkling how you possibly even did it. So I went to school in college, that is, majored in journalism and political science. Initially thought I was going to be like a regular TV or newspaper news or sports reporter. Then I thought I might go to law school. Then I thought I might work on documentaries. All the while I was doing broadcasting really just as a hobby, working both on the sports and music side. And some folks I knew in the industry who I had worked with while I had a part time job in school at a TV production company suggested that I give sports broadcasting more of a try, especially minor league baseball, because there are a lot of teams, smaller markets that have their own broadcasts, and that would be a good way to break in. Even though baseball's always been my favorite sport, I will admit in hindsight, I didn't quite know the extent of the minor leagues that I do now, and just started applying anywhere and everywhere. So it took me to a place not too far from LA, out way inland in the high desert region, Victorville, California, for then known as the High Desert Mavericks, a team that at the time was the high affiliate of the Seattle Mariners. That team got contracted several years ago, but I was there for close to 4 seasons,
Wow.
and then had an opportunity here with Oklahoma City in 2012. At the time I was hired, known as the Oklahoma City Red Hawks and affiliated with the Houston Astros. And then beginning in the fall of 2014 into the 2015 season, with the name change of Oklahoma City Dodgers, and of course the affiliation with the Los Angeles Dodgers ever since. So that's the Reader's Digest version of my background.
I love it. I interned. There was a AAA team in Portland, Oregon that I interned with for a summer, and you kind of hinted at it. I mean, I've worked in basketball, I've worked in hockey, I've worked in baseball. Minor league baseball is its own kind of experience, and when you get to like a 12-game homestand or something like that, it's something to deal with. Now, if you're a broadcaster, I guess homestand road game doesn't necessarily have the biggest impact because you're working every game. But as an intern, it'd be like, oh man, I guess I'm working 12 days in a row this week.
Yeah, no, for me, it's 150 regardless. But being on the road is nice. Like you said, it's still work. You're still
Yeah.
doing your job duties, but it's a lot more relaxed.
Yeah.
You're spending most of your day doing your work in your hotel room. You're not at the ballpark getting pulled in a lot of different directions. If it rains, you don't have to worry about going to help the tarp, pull the tarp, among a lot of different other things. You just have a lot more responsibilities naturally when you're playing at home.
Yeah.
So yes, even though you are still working on the road, it is a little bit more chill.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's get into it. I could ask you 100 follow-up questions to all of that, but I will restrain myself. Let's talk about those prospects that I mentioned. Let's start with Miguel Vargas. I think he's the guy that is probably the highest, the most highly thought of. He has the best rookie of the year odds, if you will, in the National League. That's a guy who played 113 games in front of you all last season, 17 home runs, a 915 OPS, 16 stolen bases. I want to talk about the offensive profile. All of the prospect guys seem to love him. They think the hit tool is absolutely going to carry. There's questions about power and how that projects. But before we get to the defense, I'm just curious what you think of Miguel Vargas, the offensive player, and maybe how confident you are in his ability to perform at the major league level.
Well, not to repeat what you kind of already said, but again, the biggest thing that pops out is the hit tool. And I said it last year, and it might be a little bit of hyperbole, but I feel in my time at AAA, at least for the teams that have been the quote unquote home team during that time, he does have the best hit tool I've seen,
Wow.
especially at his age as well. He was the youngest player on the roster last year, one of the youngest regular players in our league last year, and hit over 300 with a very high on base as well. So it's not like he was just putting the ball in play a ton either. I mean, he was, but he was also taking his walks. He was not
Yeah.
swinging at bad pitches. Great knowledge of the zone. In terms of the power, I mean, look, the he's still young, and if you look at his home run totals from say 2 3 years ago to now, they've gone up
Yeah.
significantly. Now, of course, it's going to be against tougher pitching in the big leagues, but I have confidence that those numbers will be good. Um, I think is he going to compete for a home run title? No, but it's not going to be a single digit home run title either. I think somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 is reasonable, and he's got great bloodlines with his father, who's a great player in Cuba. Unfortunately, just different climate at that time. Never had a chance to come over, and would have had the ability to play in the major leagues if that opportunity was there. And a guy who never panicked, never really got into a slump. Played every day, which you don't see a whole lot at AAA for a variety of reasons. But to know that he was going to be there every day, batting second, most of the time playing third base, not always something you see in the minor league. So that
Yeah.
was also a breath of fresh air, and a guy who doesn't like taking days off, that's for sure.
Well, I think I've repeated this story multiple times. I believe it's The Athletic that had it, but it was a conversation between him and his manager. And there was a guy on first base. I believe there was one strike, and the player started to steal second base, and Vargas took. And the manager told him afterwards, "Hey, you don't have to take in that spot." And Vargas basically said, "Well, the pitcher didn't have anything that he was going to be able to get me out with, so it didn't really matter." I mean, is that kind of confidence emblematic of the Miguel Vargas that you know?
Yeah, I think so. Again, a guy who never really got rattled offensively. He'd sometimes show frustrations on the defensive side, especially during pregame work if there was a play he knew he should have been able to make. But yeah, the confidence is definitely there. He's kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, kind of go with the flow kind of guy. I mean, I think we've seen how the hair has grown from him, and that's I think just kind of perfect for him and his personality as well. So yeah, I think he's a guy who it doesn't matter who he's going to face. He's not going to go in there thinking that he's going to be beat. And I know it's cliche in a sport where if you succeed 30% of the time, you're one of the best in the game. But for him, you felt like every time he came up, he was going to do something positive. You never felt that something bad was going to happen with him at the plate.
That's awesome. On the defensive side, obviously sort of a new-ish position, we'll say, at second base. Um, People, I would say, seem to be less concerned about it now, having seen how he's performed throughout the spring. Are Would you advise Dodger fans to relax a little bit if they're concerned about Vargas's ability to handle second base, or do you think there's a legitimate question of how this is going to work out?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that question in full. If I were a betting man, I think he'll be fine.
Okay.
You have to remember that the last few years, this is a guy who might have been third baseman on paper, but a lot of the time with a left-handed hitter up was playing in that 3-4 hole anyway in a pull
Mm,
shift. That's what the Dodgers do. They tend to move their third baseman to shallow right field more so than say move your shortstop to the right a second and the third baseman where the shortstop would normally be. So he has a lot of experience with balls coming at him from that angle. Might not necessarily been playing on the dirt a whole lot,
yeah.
but it's not going to be a completely foreign concept to him. I think it was very smart what the Dodgers did, knowing basically from the start of the offseason, hey, we're looking to have you play second base last year, so he could tailor his whole offseason to get
Yeah.
adjusted over there.
Let's switch gears. We'll go to one more offensive player before we move to pitching, and that's James Outman. This is a guy who, man, talk about a wild roller coaster of a career as a prospect from the outside looking in. This is a guy that a couple of years ago nobody was really talking about. And then he bursts onto the scene offensively. There's doubts, there's skepticism. Now here he is on an opening day roster. You saw just 57 games of him, but holy smokes, what a 57 games Outman had. An OPS over 1,000, 15 home runs, 61 RBIs, and oh, by the way, hit for the cycle twice in 1 week. What's the scouting report on James Outman from your perspective?
To me, James Outman is a just shows the value of scouting and player development working together. This was a
Yeah.
guy who admittedly was all tools and not a lot of refinement when he was drafted and signed out of Sacramento State University back in 2018, I believe. The scout who saw him knew there was something there. Player development knew it was going to take some work. James Outman, in retrospect, knew it was going to take some work as well, and he is definitely the first to praise the Dodgers coaching staff for is the I know the kind of famous quote now is from swinging like a caveman to being the player he is today. Um, by the time he got to Oklahoma City, yeah, the numbers in Double A were good. Yes, the PCL does have a bit of a reputation for being hitter friendly, but man, he did get off to a little bit of a slow start, which is natural and to be expected. You know, goes up, has that great week or so at the big league level, comes back, first game back in AAA, hits this mammoth home run in Salt Lake. But he also I can't remember if he got hit by a pitch or fouled the pitch off. Anyway, it fractured one of his toes. He was out for about 2 weeks, but even though the toe was still broken, he played through the rest of the season on it
Mm.
and just was the best hitter in the league from that time about mid late August through the end of the year. Like I mentioned with Miguel Vargas, you just always expected something good to happen when he was at the plate. And this is a guy who does have that more maybe home run power than Miguel Vargas does at this point, but just such an athletic guy as well, one who can easily turn a single into a double, double into a triple. And if he keeps going at his trajectory, the ceiling is there. We've already, I think, a lot of people, maybe scouts from other organizations who scouted him in college, would probably tell you he already exceeded the ceiling
Oh
they
yeah.
thought he might have had. So credit to him, credit to again the Dodgers scouting and player development. And another guy who wasn't necessarily a pick at the top of the draft, but has shown that he can be a contributor.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm curious to see how the Dodgers handle him this year, just because he is a left-handed hitter, and the Dodgers have just become famous for platooning basically everybody not named Mookie Betts out there. Who knows how that plays out? I mean, having seen him, like, was there a noticeable difference when Outman was going up against a lefty, or did he? I mean, with those numbers, I imagine he sort of handled himself well in all situations. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but I think just the fact that nothing jumps off the top of my head tells you at least something there that
Yeah.
he wasn't necessarily a guy who, lefties come out of the bullpen to face him. We're in trouble here. I don't remember ever thinking that.
And defensively, kind of what's funny to me is I follow my own understanding of Outman. I feel like the first time I became aware of him was a year ago in spring training. Guy with long hair, and he's out playing center field. And I'm like, look, I have no idea if this guy can hit, but holy smokes, can he field? And that was kind of what I believed. And then I started hearing about the hit tool. I'm like, look, compared to sort of what the Dodgers were fielding in center field over the last couple of years, if the guy could play defense, the offense wasn't necessarily going to have to be amazing in order to at least kind of meet the standards. Am I overvaluing his defense, or do you think Dodger fans are going to be pleasantly surprised with just how good Outman is defensively?
Well, the funny thing is, he didn't actually play much center field for us. Yeah, he had played at center field primarily throughout his career, but here in Oklahoma City, we have Drew Avens as the
Mm.
everyday center fielder and is going to be most likely the everyday center fielder once again. So Alman actually played mostly right field with Oklahoma City. He did play a little bit of center field here in OKC as well. So I got to see him mostly out in right field, and we have some funky angles really all throughout the outfield at our home ballpark, and he handled those just fine. It's a guy who I felt sometimes maybe didn't have the smoothest read off the bats in right, Again, I can't really say what
Yeah.
it was like in center to a definitive amount, but he always got to the spot. He always made the play.
Got it. Got it. Well, let's shift to pitching. Ryan Pepio, 17 starts at AAA last season, 2.56 ERA across 91 and a third, 114 strikeouts, a whip of 1.07. What was interesting is that the year before last, he made 9 starts at AAA and had an ERA over 7. Having seen him make 9 starts and struggle to see him make 17 starts in this up and down between the major leagues and minor leagues kind of a deal. What was the difference? Like, what would you say was the key to that transformation, if you will?
Yeah, boy, what a transformation it was. And, for some guys, when they get to AAA, it might be the first time in their entire life that they've struggled with the game of baseball. And that seemed to be the case for Ryan Pepio there in 2021, in which, a lot of it, he'll admit, was pressure that he put on himself. Just I think the first time that guys get up here and there's a pitch that they throw that they're used to guys they basically faced their entire life swinging at, and now they're taking them from balls. You can sometimes almost see the thought bubble come out of their
Mm,
head when they're on the mound. You're like, wait a second, that's not supposed to happen. And then for a guy like Pepe, and like I said, he'll admit this. It's just the self doubt started to creep in, and then he felt like every 5 days he went out there, he was trying to do too much to make it better, and it really just made things worse. So you could just tell it was a, I don't want to say more mature, but just kind of a calmer demeanor out there on the mound, bit more self assured out there as well. It's you hear that term, the game slowed down for him, and that's what it was like watching him between 2021 and 2022. And to do it in an unenviable spot. I mean, yes, it's great anytime you have a chance to go up to the major leagues.
yeah.
But this role is not an easy one to fill. When you're in AAA, you get called up for a start here, a start there. There are times when, whether it's Pepio or maybe a Michael Grove, when they're supposed to start and a day before, maybe even the day of, oh, guess what? You're not pitching anymore because you might be needed in the big leagues. It's
Yeah.
not a sure thing. It's just a might. And that happens all the time at AAA. And it's just hard to get on a consistent schedule between all that stuff. And the game of baseball is such a game of routine. And on the pitching side, especially the starting pitching side, to be able to have that consistent 4 or 5 day window in between each start is so critical for all starting pitchers. And for him to not really have that for most of the year and
Yeah.
still succeed was really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one other pitcher I almost forgot to mention here is Andre Jackson, a guy who was sort of, I would say, probably the biggest surprise on the Dodgers opening day roster. He'll be in the relief role. And I say it's a surprise because in 2021, he makes his major league debut and he's up with the Dodgers a bit. And then in 2022, he just kind of disappears from the West Coast altogether. He's with you guys for the entirety of the season. He makes 19 starts. And they weren't awesome necessarily. A 5 ERA is where he finishes. And heading into the spring, Michael Grove gets the first start of spring training. Pepio is kind of making his move. Gavin Stone is a name that people are starting to pay attention to. Even Nick Nastrini is a name that's around. And Andre Jackson felt like a name that nobody was talking about. And yet, when it's all said and done, he's on the opening day roster, and guys like Grove are down in AAA. So what would you say about Andre Jackson and maybe what you've learned? I mean, because this is a guy who's had success at lower levels of the minors, but has struggled at AAA, then makes his major league debut and goes back. And so, to me, it's just a cool story of a guy who struggled last year, probably wondered where his career was headed, and now he's in the major leagues. But what would you tell Dodger fans about Andre Jackson?
Well, credit to him. Guy that didn't have a very good season for the most part last year. For the first time in his career, struggled with walks.
Yeah,
It had never really been an issue for him before. And there were just times where not only was it walks, but just a lot of pitches. You can still get outs and not walk a ton of guys and throw a lot of pitches. Whether it's going to 3-2 every batter, a lot of pitches getting fouled off, just was not efficient whatsoever. He told me that when he started to refine things kind of later in the season, just starting to kind of feel a bit more athletic, back to being athletic in his delivery, just as if he was out there realizing that he's just playing a game, being a little bit
Yeah.
more looser there out on the mound. It's kind of like what we talked about with Pepio when you have one or two things not go your way, now you're putting pressure on yourself to try and make everything right, and things end up getting worse as a result. So just being a little bit freer and looser out there on the mound. He started to find this niche near the end of last season with this long relief role in games with Oklahoma City. And I don't specifically know maybe if it was something that he felt, maybe it's one of those in which it has to do with how he was getting ready for games before, and maybe just the kind of the they'll still give him a long lead time in the bullpen when they know he's about to come in the middle of the game. But yeah, there were a few instances where he was really designated to be a long guy out of the pen, working in a tandem, maybe following an opener. And he really seemed to thrive in that role, both at AAA and both in the big leagues. And it seems to have carried over to this season as well.
Yeah, and I should clean that up. He did make 4 appearances at the major league level, but 2021 was the debut. Last name, and then we'll get you out of here. Michael Bush. This is a name that when I post a video and talk about prospects, I'll have 10 comments down below. Where's Michael Bush? Why isn't Michael Bush called up yet? And look, as somebody who follows the team as closely as I do, I haven't seen a ton of Michael Bush myself. I know what the arguments are. Where does he play defensively? Can he play left field? That's kind of the spot that feels like it might be the best position for him. Designated hitter, of course, but they signed JD Martinez. It doesn't seem like anybody doubts he can hit. The question is whether or not he will be able to field at a major league level. Again, I'm not asking you to putting you on the spot and saying, hey, can he play left field at a major league level? But what are your thoughts about Michael Bush, a guy who kind of feels like a prospect that in any other organization probably makes his major league debut last year and yet still hasn't sniffed it with the Dodgers up until now?
I think that's a good way of putting it. But I mean, he's on the 40-man roster now. So, and
Yeah.
I think it's inevitable that he's going to be up there at some point, barring injury, which you certainly don't hope for. I think, and from what I understand, and I haven't really pinned down manager Travis Barber about this yet, but it seems like we're going to see him in a lot of different positions this year.
Okay.
And that might include positions he hasn't necessarily played in pro ball before. So I think we're going to see some first base. We're going to see second and left again. And I think we could see some third base as well, to make him more that versatile bat, because, like you said, the bat's going to be the carrying tool for him.
Yeah.
They at least get to be able to be passable at certain areas, that you get the bat in the lineup. So we'll see. I mean, I know the guy's going to work hard at it, to get better, whether it's at any of those positions mentioned. But again, a guy who I got so many questions last year. How does he look at second base? And his athleticism, I think, gets undersold overall. He's a guy who played, baseball, football, teams quarterback in high school, hockey player from Minnesota. He is athletic, man. Watching
Yeah.
him play on an everyday basis and plays that he would range to make at second base. There are a lot of times in shifts with right-handed hitters up, he played at left to second base, or maybe he's shaded the middle and has to cross to the left to make a play in the middle of a play going from right side of second to left side of second, and he'd do it. So I think his athleticism will help him eventually adjust to wherever it is the Dodgers need to play him and find a defensive home.
I love it. I love it. Well, Alex, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your insight. As we said, Saturday, I believe for you is opening night. Is that a home
Friday.
game? Friday. Oh, home game or road game?
No, we are at home this weekend. Yep. And
Love
then
it.
out in Las Vegas next week. So all those West Coast fans, I love it when we go play anywhere really west of Oklahoma City. Always a lot of Dodgers fans come out and support, but we'll be pretty close to you guys next Tuesday through Sunday, for those who are out in LA. But yeah, home this first weekend here.
Love it. Well, I got a couple friends that are going to be in Vegas Monday and Tuesday of next week, so I might need to poke them a little bit and say, "Hey, get out and see the Dodgers AAA team."
Yeah,
Well, Alex, best of luck this season. Thank you again for your time, and best of luck with everything that you've got this weekend and beyond.
you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.